So I'm going to be telling you a little bit about the work at UCL Institute of Education, which is where I'm based and where Anise is a student. And, you know, we don't brag about it, but, you know, UCL Institute of Education is the #1 educational research institution in the world. We've had that position now for 6 years, and there's a lot of competition around the world. But one of the reasons that we do so well with our research and our research outputs is we're really, really big. So most universities have a small education department. We are a whole institution that only focuses on social sciences and education. And I'm based in UCL Knowledge Lab, and that is a research and innovation centre for social sciences in the field of technologies. And I think when I share some of our work in this presentation, you'll understand why we are social scientists, although we collaborate totally with other disciplines in order to do the work that we do. But our approach is very much to think about what are the impacts on us as humans and everything we do in relation to the digital world. So the lab itself is arranged around a set of themes. So our broad aims are to explore media, technology and communication in the digital age, but we sort of divide into 5 research groups. And I've got examples this afternoon of projects from all of these areas to give you a sense of the diversity. So without doubt, probably this biggest theme that we're known up for and our research is about is actually digital learning technologies, designing them, learning how to implement them in different learning situations, and very importantly, scaling their use. So we're really not a group of social scientists who like to do the design work and then hand off what we produce to other people. We're really interested to understand what happens next. And quite a number of our projects are very longitudinal, sort of 10, 15 years worth of work. And very often they're looking at how can we help, in particular, the school sector, teachers, school systems, to embed and sustain their use of these technologies. There's so much coming along. How do you ever decide what you stick with and what you sort of discard and move on to something new? Second theme is around communication and collaboration. We have a fantastic set of projects that address digital making, media and play. There's a really important area of digital ethics and inclusion and diversity. And then I'm going to finish with sort of what is our really sort of cutting edge, future looking theme around discourse, technology and the body. And there's some very exciting work emerging there. So in each case, I've either got sort of a short summary, I've got some bits of video, I've got some screens that sort of show the technologies themselves. This is an absolute taster, and I'll obviously invite you at the end if there's any of the projects there or any of the people that I'm going to refer to you'd like to be connected with to know more, please contact me at the end. And I think people is key here because very often we hear about the projects, but I've also named the people behind them so that you get a sense of not only what we're working on, but who's involved in those projects. So I'm going to start with one of our real sort of flagship pieces of work, and this really comes from Professor Diana Laurillard, who was formerly the Director of Digital at the Open University, which was the very first university in the world that really opened up learning through video and television to a wide group. She then went on to conceive and design a lot of the early MOOCs. And the work that her team is doing now is really trying to support the developing world in particular around how do you go about designing MOOC environments, which are a really good way to scale and widen access to education and learning in communities that are really impacted by displacement. Some very interesting work going on there. And sitting behind Diana and her team's work is a tool called the Learning Designer. And if you've never seen the Learning Designer tool, it's exactly what it says. It's a digital tool to help anybody who is designing learning to think through and actually sort of create a digital map of their learning design. So it gets you thinking about what sort of activity, how long is that activity going to take, what resource will it need? And it essentially allows you to plan digital and blended resources and give you a sense of whether you're giving your students enough diversity of experience in what they're doing. So they're not just sitting and watching, which can often happen. One of the outputs that's very significant from Diana's work, and this is a completely open access course to anybody who's interested, is if you want to learn about designing blended learning, which is obviously a really important theme for the world right now, there's a free online course, which is a MOOC in itself, on FutureLearn that introduces you to the Learning Designer tool. And I'd totally recommend that to anyone who really wants to understand better what the principles underpinning good learning design, where they come from. Next up is a project which is actually taking some very old ideas and putting them into a very new technology. Some of you may be aware of one of the fathers of educational technology, Seymour Papert, who designed a very early programming language for children called Logo. This is really the modern day update of that work. And my colleagues, Richard Noss, Celia Hoyles, and others, and I'm involved in this one, we've worked together to design a set of curriculum resources for 7 to 9-year-olds, but we don't just design the resources. What we also, as one of our sort of outputs, if you like, one of the things that we gift to the world, is a pedagogical framework for teaching young children using Scratch. And this is really because so much of the coding education that goes on around the world, and we're seeing this play out in lots and lots of countries as they adopt coding in the primary curriculum, is what we call copy code. That means the teacher gives the student some code, they learn to type it in, they run it, it works, move on. And what they don't actually learn and understand is the building blocks of that programming language. So we really encourage a whole range of pedagogies to be used when teaching young children coding. And to give you an example, very typical activity where you're actually asking children to start with what we call half-baked environments. They get given a bit of it and they're first asked to change things to try and understand how the program works before you then start to create it from scratch. So one of the sort of examples there, this is a lovely activity where the children fill a skyscape with fireworks of polygons, and that's obviously where the maths connections are coming in. Second big project that's now in its, nearly its 8th year of existence is Cornerstone Maths. And this is a project that I'm centrally involved in with colleagues. And this is a project that really is trying to put a bit of dynamism into the maths education world for lower secondary students. Again, much of the teaching is didactic, even if digital tools are used. And what we were very keen to do was create dynamic environments where the students would be able to take control, start with, again, a bit of a half-baked idea, but by playing and editing, in this case, the different representations on this screen, really understand how graphs connect with tables of values and how tables of values connect with functions and equations, which are really fundamentally difficult ideas for lower secondary children to understand. We have a project which focuses on digital reading, the iRead project. And although this project has actually produced award-winning reading apps, what's really interesting is that the key output from this one is actually its linguistic infrastructure. Now, for anyone who is designing or building or working with any app in any language that is trying to either teach an aspect of reading or supporting children in their development of the language, there's 2 key things that you always need. You obviously need a dictionary, but also you need to have some model to understand what the progression in learning that particular aspect of the language is. And the iRead project has developed a linguistic infrastructure, which it is actually sharing widely with educational technology companies around the world. I'm going to share their short video on that one.
Not all literacy apps are created equal. If you want to build or improve an EdTech product for literacy, the iRead project's linguistic infrastructure is here to help. Available in English, Spanish, Greek, and German, the linguistic infrastructure provides developers with content that captures the journey of a student learning to read. For example, before a student can accurately decode the word palace, they should master the linguistic feature CE. But before learning the less frequent CE, they should learn the simpler forms S, E, and C. The linguistic infrastructure provides word lists for each linguistic feature of a learner's journey. Each word comes with valuable information about phonics, grammar, syllables, and more. Our team of linguists and education researchers from top universities across Europe use rigorous research techniques informed by the latest science to develop the word lists and learning journey. The linguistic infrastructure has already been used to create award-winning apps, such as Navigo, Pyramid of the Lost Words.
Having iRead's linguistic infrastructure meant we could focus on building the bits of the app that we're really good at, without having to spend time and money to create our own linguistic resources. We were confident that the linguistic infrastructure was high quality, and that allowed us to quickly develop a high quality award-winning app on top of it.
The iRead project's linguistic infrastructure can help you help your students. Contact us now for more information.
So yes, so the fact that we've created this linguistic infrastructure that's actually a product, a tool that can be used by EdTech companies, and I'm not going to say it's open source because an aspect of what we do has to have some sustainability to it, but it's certainly a resource that anyone developing a reading related tool is probably going to be interested to look at. So moving into a different sort of zone now and thinking about technology enhanced communication and collaboration, one of the big challenges in trying to evidence learners' interactions in diverse situations. So let's take a learner away from a computer where you might be able to capture a lot of what's going on and put them into a collaborative practical setting. It's really quite challenging to think about how we might develop digital tools to support assessment in that context. And the reason why this is so important is that much learning goes on in practice and practical based environments, but doesn't get registered and logged until students take an exam or they submit a piece of coursework, whereas there's clearly a lot to understand about the processes of that sort of collaborative learning. So my colleagues Mutlu and Rose have led on this project, and this is really trying to understand what does the multimodal learning analytic toolkit look like. So how are you going to collect data from the different devices that might be involved in that collaboration, and then how can you actually use that to build out dashboards and data sets that help teachers, learners, assessors to get a sense of what that engagement has been. And this is a highly challenging area. And if I just show a typical example of some students working on, in this case, it's a collaborative making project involving coding some devices, Internet of Things devices, for a project in an undergraduate engineering course, you can see straight away there's a whole host of digital devices that they're using in this task, and they're actually standing at a bespoke designed workstation that this project has produced. So one of the partners in this project was a furniture designer who was working with the team to try and understand what sort of visual feedback you might want to give and how these devices might connect together. Now, the results are extensive, and there's a good number of publications by Mutlu, Rose and the team. But just to give you an idea of the sort of research data that they were collecting there, obviously you've got multiple participants, you've got many hands, you've got many devices, and what their digital analytics, so their learning analytics is beginning to do is to at least track participation. You get to get a sense of who's engaging in what part of the task, and to give you simple models of that. Obviously a teacher walking around the classroom doesn't need this technology, but how can we capture the assessment of practical based work where you clearly won't have one teacher to one group of students in many settings? So quite exciting things going on there in quite challenging circumstances. Off to another of our themes, and this is always fantastic to talk to any of the colleagues on these projects, because we have a theme which is digital making, media and play, which really covers such a range of projects, and this particular one is one that is bringing to life an archive of children's play that was actually constructed in the 1950s in England. And the archive belonged to a set of researchers, sorry, they weren't researchers, it was a husband and wife couple who basically went around the country interviewing children about the games they played in the playground, interviewing their parents and their grandparents about the games that they played, and then looking to see how those stories could be both digitized and brought to life for the benefit of children now. So they've got a whole host of ways in which they're doing that, but essentially they took this manuscript archive, which was, as it says, 10,000 stories that were taken, and then looked at how they could make them accessible in museums and galleries now. So what were children's handwritten scripts of the different games have been turned into digital games that children now are able to play with. And I've got a lovely example of some children in England here, and I want you to think about your own country. Do rhymes like this exist?
Lemonade, iced tea, Coca-Cola, Pepsi. Lemonade, iced tea, Coca-Cola, Pepsi. Turn around, touch around, flip your head, I don't care, freeze. Stop, 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 icky, icky, boom. That was amazing, guys.
So how this is being sort of actually turned into digital devices and resources now is just fantastic ideas that are going into children's museums in this country. So this one's very recent. It only went into the museum last year, but it's a cool box where the children can call up voices from the past and listen to either people talking about the games they play, but obviously it's not just about listening to the past, it's also about teaching children the games now. And these are a lovely set of QR coded cards that both teach the game, allow you to listen into the original audio of somebody talking about playing that game. And you know, the bottom line is this is to try and encourage children probably away from a few screens, I would suggest, into the sorts of games that we know they enjoy if they know that they exist. On a similar theme, but on the other hand, slightly different. Digital making media and play, still the same theme. We've got the project called Playing Out with the Internet of Things. And this is really looking at how we start to put digital devices out into playgrounds. And there's a lot of things going on in this particular project, but this was very much responding to worries and concerns about childhood obesity, about children not playing outside as much as they might have done in the past for multiple reasons, whether it's traffic, whether it's just not having the places to go, or whether it's literally trying to lure them away from screens. But the whole idea was to try and come up with games that could be played by children under 9, that were enhanced by digital resources in some ways. And this really does involve partners, because ultimately these games are going out into the wild. There isn't going to be anybody there to explain. So they have to have these ideas of instructables. They have to build in teaching the game into the resource itself. And there's quite a number of examples here. And obviously I'm going to put the web links are all there for you to go and have a look. But there's lots of interesting projects with lanterns, getting lights working, teaching aspects of coding and programming by encouraging students to really interact with the design. And it was quite interesting that this project, in some sense, came to life when streets went a little bit more quiet during the pandemic, because obviously it was a little bit safer for children to go out when the traffic in many cities went pretty well to nothing. Now, digital ethics, inclusion and diversity is a very important theme that colleagues of mine focus on. And the D4D project is looking particularly at how disability affects people in the community and in the context of digital. So they really have a very broad set of projects that you can look at on their website. But examples of how bodies are represented in video games is a really good example. So, you know, we take it for granted that these characters appear, but diversity is generally really poorly represented in that. And obviously that has huge impact for young people or children who have disabilities when they don't see images that look like them. But also looking at how, I mean, it slightly links to the final project that I'm going to talk about, which is very much focused on the notion of touch and the way in which we might have extra digital hands. So the idea that with disability, if we're able to design and develop robotic tools that can then enhance disabled bodies, this is very much in this area of thinking. So we work very closely with the health professionals and the physical scientists, as well as obviously the roboticists and engineers. But these are sort of really areas that I suppose in a research lab like ours, we are looking beyond. We're always looking at where are the next important ideas, not driven by the tech. And I think that's probably what separates us as social scientists. We're not the ones who are designing the tech. We're looking at the tech as it's being designed to really try and understand what the place of that tech is going to be in society in a really broad sense. So our eyes are very open to the inadvertent consequences that come about when, you know, we race ahead with these technological ideas. You know, we're in some ways we're stopping to think, you know, how is that going to impact on everyone in society, not just those who might be able-bodied or if there ever was a meaning to the word normal. Now, the last project that I'm going to mention, because I actually do want to allow quite a bit of time for discussion and questions around the themes that I've mentioned, is around touch. And this is a very exciting project we have at the lab. It's led by our former director, Professor Carey Jewett, who we're going to see sort of speak in the video in a moment. And what's so interesting about this project is we take touch for granted. We do touch digital devices. We've got, you know, touch pads and the touch is in there and touch screens. But interestingly, in the digital world, touch has really only been conceptualized as vibration. So I know early sort of devices to support students with disabilities to read screens might give you mouse vibrations, or you might get screen vibrations when you hover over something that could be is an actionable object. But Carey and her team are really taking this theme off in, you know, unbelievable directions. So I'm going to share a short video about the InTouch project. And I hope this will stimulate some discussion.
I feel passionate about how people communicate and trying to understand the different ways that people do that. For me, how people communicate is much more about their bodies, about the ways in which they look at one another. We touch things and we touch our friends, our families, objects all the time. Sometimes we don't even really understand why we're kind of reaching out to touch something or somebody. But it's a kind of first sense that we have as human beings. So I'm very interested in these below the radar ways of communicating, and touch is kind of like my final frontier, if you like, that isn't yet fully articulated through the digital technologies we have, but will be. One thing that we're doing is engaging with different kinds of technology, so the tactile internet, touch in a VR environment, looking at tangible technologies, wearables, so that we can really identify what the social problems are and then look at how we can inform the design of those to really power their impact. The Institute of Education has an expert group of people looking at how people communicate, but the Institute is also a faculty within UCL, and we're collaborating with colleagues there to explore how they think about touch. They're doing some work around industrial robots, so we can kind of come in and explore that communicative environment. Where we'd like to see this going is that we're situated well enough within the digital touch development landscape that our findings can input into the development of new technologies. Also, we can intervene to help ensure that really bad design decisions aren't made about how people communicate. Digital touch technologies are at an emergent stage where in the next 10 to 15 years, they're going to transform the ways we communicate.
So what's interesting about the InTouch project, and they're doing some fantastic work out and about in museums, you saw that sort of funny little prongy thing with all of the different textures and textiles, because one of the things that is really been obvious as their project began is we have a really underdeveloped language set to describe touch. It's something that we take for granted, but when you think about how we describe the many, many different types of surfaces and that our fingers land on, it's really quite interesting how little is known and how little is theorized around the sensations of touch. It's known from the sort of physical, biological perspective, but it's that social, emotional response that we have that is really quite interesting. So the work of Kerry and her team is really looking at how this impacts on things like personal relationships, health and well-being, work and learning and leisure. So areas that, you would think, well, how does that fit with education? But of course, all of these impact on us, and all of the technologies are going to arrive, but are we ready to be able to understand how we're going to be able to make the most of those technologies? So what I've aimed to do is give you an absolute whistle stop across a number of our projects. I think in there's quite a lot to explore, quite a lot to think about. So if I can frame sort of a discussion that I'd like to open up now. I work in a research centre. My job is an academic. I'm lucky enough to get to work on these sorts of projects, and I personally am very passionate that what we learn from doing these projects reaches the world that we're trying to impact. So one of the areas that I would be really interested to get views and have thoughts on is, how best can we inside academia reach people who might value the learnings from our particular projects. So the range of projects I gave you there face almost everybody in communities. Some going into schools and teachers, parents, parents of children, carers of children, broader technology industry. So, how can academics like myself and the team that I work with, what are the sorts of ways in which we can bring some of these learnings to life in ways that maybe we're not doing very well right now? And then obviously of all of the themes that you've seen there, I'm sure there'll be questions and discussions around some of those ideas. So I'm going to call on Milena to help me sort of manage this so that we can ideally have microphones on and see if we can start to discuss some of these ideas.
Yeah, I think the best way would be if you could, just start talking. That would be the best way, because the group is quite small. We are only 26 people. So if anybody has any thoughts and would like to share, you can either start talking or raise your hand.
I have one question actually. Maybe I'll put my video on, it's a bit nicer. So this touch research that you're doing, I saw that originally when I applied for the master's ages ago, because it's one of the videos, isn't it, on the website? Yeah. And in a way, I'm totally overwhelmed by this idea. But I'm also curious, like what what is the goal exactly of this? I mean, I can see there's going to be multiple applications. You're talking about working with robots and screen touch and everything.
Yeah.
But is there a kind of a smaller application that people are working towards right now that would be concrete within like 2 years?
So interestingly, because we predominantly aren't designing the new tech, that particular project isn't looking to design a new tech that does, addresses an aspect of touch in a particular way. It's much, I mean, and this is interesting because, to be honest, that's a really example of very pure research. The goals for that is to try to develop theories around touch in the digital context, which don't exist yet. So it's there, it's very much there to fill a knowledge gap, which sort of sits with certainly what we're set out to do inside universities. And Carrie herself and her team, it's a research project at its heart. So it is trying to work with the stakeholders to develop the ontology, to stimulate them to think broadly, and their outputs would ideally feed into developers' projects, or to feed in to people who are beginning to want to understand the impacts of touch technologies that might already be out there. Caroline, I hope that helps.
All right, thank you. Yeah, it does. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
So are all of these projects that we just saw now, is it just in academia and for research purposes, or does it all also go into the industry and you have uses for it? So how does this work?
Yeah, okay. So obviously they're all quite different. And to Caroline's point, when we set out with these projects, we have goals, and some of those goals will be to develop a product. So, both of the maths projects develop products, curriculum resources for schools, and professional development materials for teachers they are both open source, and we work with partners in other universities in other countries to support them to redesign or rethink those resources in their context. So that's an example where, yes, we've absolutely developed a product, and it's actually us that are going out to work with partners to see if they're resources that are useful to them. In the case of the reading app, that was co-designed with industry. So industry partners were part of that project, and the 4 companies that were involved in the project were the first to be able to embed those the underlying dictionaries and learning trajectories in their product. So if you like, they got there first and had the opportunity to both co-design the resource, because one of the challenges we have in EdTech, if we're looking to try to design tools or scripts or codes that could go into industry products, we need to work with more than one company often. We need to work with a range of companies so that the nature of the tech that we do produce or co-produce has got value. So we tend not to just sort of invest our expertise. We're not the in-house researchers for the company. We have a broader view on it than that, but we're certainly always looking at how some of the outputs in their different forms could then be taken up by industry without a doubt. So for us, collaboration is key. The earlier companies know that we're developing that thing, the earlier they can get involved to take advantage of it. But as I go back to my question, communicating is one of our biggest challenges. How do we share the fact that, all of these things are going on so that we do in fact reach the companies that would really benefit from having good engines, I would say, inside their products?
So if I can pick up on this one, and if you have any comments, the rest of you, please feel free to say something. What I personally miss whenever I try to look up some information, some evidence-based materials, articles, I miss the place where I should go, because obviously Google is the first point of contact, but it takes a lot of time to go through all the materials that are over there and to distillate this information that I really need. So I don't really know where should I go if I want to find information about, I don't know, the impact of educational technology on motivation or any other topic. So maybe how to search for this kind of materials. One thing is, of course, how to communicate them. That will be your question, and mine will be where should I look for it?
Yeah, fantastic question, because you know me, I'm not going to tell you, I'm going to show you. So I'm just sharing my screen over here because there is a phenomenal website that we used a lot with the companies inside Educate. Let me just share my screen and then you'll be able to see it with me. It's an organization in the UK called Digital Promise. They're asking me to sign up right now. I'm going to do that right now. I hope you're seeing my screen. Digital Promise are real collaborators of ours, and they are not-for-profit set up in the US who are essentially trying to bridge the gap between research and the potential users in education. And one of the projects that they have, and I have to find it, is their research map. And what I like about this is, yes, you can do a Google search. Let's hope that's going to open up. Yes, you can do a Google search, and better still a Google Scholar search if you're looking for academic outputs. But the Digital Promise Research Map actually lets you search. This is all new stuff they've put in since I was last there. What was the word you said? Was it motivation? You said you were interested in?
Yeah, for example.
Yeah, okay, so motivation, anybody's motivation, little children, big children, it would help to narrow it down.
Adults motivation.
Okay, so with a very, very broad search like that, which obviously would bring up masses in, the other important thing is this is filtered the technology related literature. So there's almost an assumption that when we go into Digital Promise that we're searching for literature that concerns some aspect of learning or technology. So without doing anything flashy on my search levels or topics, it does usually take a few minutes, although that doesn't seem to have found anything. Yes, it has. They just aren't showing up. Okay, so if I hover over that map, basically it gives you the general themes that are related to adult motivation, and depending on where I go, if I'm interested in special education, or I'm looking at aspects of memory, or if I want to think about it in terms of STEM learning, when I click on that link, this is essentially what you'd have got in your Google search. So down here, these are all links to, and interestingly, this will usually link out to the Google Scholar page to articles on that area. So all of these sources are worth looking at if you like. So what's nice about this visualization is you need to obviously spend a little bit of time thinking about how you want to search it and how you want to use it. There's some really good guidance and instructions there. But if I go for something else, if I go for, let's go for augmented reality and maths. You have to remember when you're searching for maths on anything, you never write maths, you always write math because of the American spelling. And I'm going to get, again, now what's interesting is those themes, you'll notice they're the same themes. So they sort of cut through all of the papers that are out there in relation to, if you like, the themes that people are most commonly searching for. So there's a tool that lets you, let's go over here and see what we get. And as with all searches, you usually need to go down a couple of levels before you find something that's really interesting to you. I'm not going to delve down that one now, but that's Digital Promise. And I'm just trying to remember, and I might need Anissa to remind me. The other one we used to use a lot was, do you remember the name of it, Anissa?
Do you mean
knowledge something?
Promise?
Say that again.
Do you mean in Digital Promise?
No, the other search tool we used to use, was it Knowledge Maps? I think it's called Knowledge Maps.
I don't know.
I'm going to guess Knowledge Maps. Open Knowledge Maps, that's it. And this is a very similar tool by a different set of developers. And I'm going to go for your same motivation, adult tech. It will take a while. And it comes up with the top 100 the top 100 papers in that area. We'll give it a moment or two. This is searching literally everything. So whereas Digital Promise was filtered for essentially school, lower and college education, this is really searching the world. It's worth waiting for, I assure you. But I don't know, it really does depend on what sort of searcher you are. If you respond better to sort of a more dynamic digital tool, then these sorts of search engines might be more useful for you when you're starting out. It's obviously a really big map. because it's taking longer than expected. So I'll leave that running in the background, and if it pops up while we're talking, I'll share it again.
Wonderful, thank you. So at least 2 tools that definitely we can go ahead and start using straight away. But then wherever I look at into, I always see written materials.
Yes.
So yeah, the question to all of you: what kind of materials would you like to see? Because I mean, we don't have time. We are all overwhelmed, busy, and there's so much going on, and it's constantly changing. So what would be the best way for you as experts in the field, as people who are interested in the field, the best way to learn and the best way to access this kind of materials? Like Nur, you're writing here about audiovisual, Caroline about infographics, but is it really? Is it really? How many infographics and audiovisuals content do you have around? In what form? How exactly would you like to see it? How long should it last? Help us. We want to help you.
I can quickly say that I think having some really attractive visual things that are easy access are a good first step in. And like what's already been very useful so far, well, from these conferences, these 3 days we've done, is with bringing experts together who tell us, you know, their version of research in the world within a short time in a video conference with people. That alone is such a great way of learning about things for me personally, because you've got the sound and you've got the visual and you've got the person there. So actually for me, that's probably one of the best free conferences where people could come together and learn about stuff that are easy, you know, well advertised in lots of places that would be easy to find. I think would actually be probably one of the best. And then apart from that, if you have really attractive things on YouTube, easy to find images on places like Google, it's all about, you know, channeling, isn't it? And making sure that people can find you and get channeled towards you. So I think in that case, you could just think about any kind of marketing, you know, that happens in other sectors, digital marketing thing and all those tools. I mean, yeah, for me, but this, what we're doing now is the best.
Thank you. You're very kind, Caroline.
Yes, because for those tools, like when they show graph models, it's really difficult to make a good taxonomy. So, and yeah, and that I find always difficult to find the topics, because when you're not really used already with the taxonomy, it's quite difficult. But for the rest, it's great. It's great. Yeah.
Absolutely. I see also Raki here put in the chat, don't be shy, please. In this session, feel free to speak up as well. Multimodal depends on everyone's learning style. It needs to cater to all styles, definitely. So how do we balance it? How do we balance between the learning style that would be more kinesthetic, the other one would be more visual?
So I don't know, I feel like it's very ambitious, but I feel like if we have to reach everyone in a very learning, and we want everyone to espouse learning, so then I feel like all resources need to cater to all modes. But I know it's like very challenging, but I feel like that's like the aim that I would love to see, because to go through so much reading may not be everyone's cup of tea, or just like watching videos, like people zone out. So I think we just have to figure all modes of learning.
Yeah. You got muted at the very end, but I think I got the point. It's good storytelling and with visual graphical video. That's another idea. So telling a story about it, but okay, telling a story about research papers, I'm not so sure. Alison, what do you think about it?
Well, it's really interesting, because in a way there's different research traditions in different fields. And as a social scientist, it's very common to write first person, to own what you do, to own your actions, to mention the people you work with. You know, you have sort of a human story in the way that we report research. That's really not the same in other disciplines. I mean, if you go into the field of human-computer interaction or in a lot of psychological studies, it's almost like the people behind the research are anonymous. And that's part of the culture. Whereas I would argue, and I think, you know, speaking to Peter's point about reaching out, you know, all the people behind these research papers are human. They exist. You can contact them. You can discuss their work with them. You can ask them for a copy of that paper that's locked behind a paywall. So I think it's that part of it is you know, literally the way we communicate, and not seeing barriers or hierarchies in this. We're all contributing to different aspects of what we do in different ways. In my view, we're all very, very equal. We all have something to offer and something to give and something to exchange. So I think I mean, we have to, you know, these things only move when the people change the cultural traditions. And I think, you know, as we're lucky, we're starting out this European EdTech Network, and we never laid down any principles about how we'd operate or how we work together. But it's really nice that it's coming out very, very flat. Everyone's valued. We really want to hear how anyone with an interest in this sector can tell their story, Milena, wherever they are, whether you're starting out as a master's student or whether you're a professor of 30 years experience. So I do think, you know, at least one thing we can do in the materials we're able to share on the EETN site is we can write our own stories, can't we? And I think it's a hard job to try and translate heavy research papers, but it can be done. Otherwise, what's the point? What's the point?
So now one thing that came to my head, and maybe in the longer term when developing the EETN, and I would really appreciate if you could tell me what you think about it. Maybe you could do it. So creating a database in which, I don't know if you are familiar with Gapminder. Have you heard about that tool? For me, that tool is amazing because it's not only about finding data and conclusions of the researcher, but you actually get the data and you get to play with it. So you can plot the data however you want to see it and compare it and work with data on your own. So it's a very hands-on experience. And then on the other hand, some kind of summarized, so database in which you would have different categories and really one paragraph summary of what the conclusions of the paper are. If you want to go more into details, you can get there, because many abstracts, for example, of the research materials that I've read, after reading an abstract, I still wasn't sure what this paper will be about, to be completely honest with you. And maybe it's me, but I struggled a lot. And I would like to have this database in which I could get into and see, okay, is it really relevant for me? Can I really, well, first of all, pay for this paper, because many research papers, you have to pay for them. That's another thing that, well, that doesn't help to promote. And then, do I really want to go through these 50 pages of analysis to find out at the end that actually it wasn't what I was looking for?
Yeah, I mean, you're really just, I think half of my students listening to this will be just with you on this. I mean, learning to read and make sense of research papers is hard. There's definitely techniques, but it's definitely helped if the researcher themselves is a good communicator. I think Anisa's point of, you know, start with what really interests you, and, you know, you do have to seek out the topics, but occasionally we all have to grapple with those really, really hard papers. But yeah, I mean, that's how we stay abreast and how we learn. So the academic papers are there. They're a source. You know, if the academic has also produced some other materials that help break things down. A lot of journals now insist that, you know, before you even send your paper in, you've almost highlighted what the key points are. You've highlighted which audience this is for. They really are encouraging much more practical approaches to change that culture. But no, you're absolutely right. It's challenging. It's challenging.
Milena,
Lisa, yeah, come on, you tell us, because
it was so tough coming from the business world, and I did not understand any abstract. I didn't know what was going on because there's a different language. It's English, fine, but it's a different language. And so you have to basically learn all these terms before even understanding what the abstract is. So But I now understand from the research perspective that it's important to have precise terms so that people can collaborate with you. That's nice that there's precise terms, but we need to, depending on the audience, maybe we could write some summaries that are also for, abstracts for the business world, or so it's not designed in the same way, because it makes sense to have research abstracts for that precision. And then we need to have other things to actually reach out for different purposes. So what you're saying, Milena, there's definitely a need, there's a market for this, of then translating those summaries, and then, like everyone suggested, putting them into different ways that are more engaging and more interesting, for sure.
Yeah, and especially when you have dyslexia, it's terrible. If you have all those new words, it's
Yeah.
And then it stops.
Yeah. And that's where technology can help, isn't it, Evelyn?
Yeah,
some of the screen readers hover over annotations and lexicons that will come up when you're in that process. And actually, that's a really key point, is, Milena. In the old days, you'd print it out, you'd look at it on paper. There's some really smart technologies now that are supporting not just the reading process, but one of the companies that Anita and I work with, ZenReader, created an amazing technology to help systematic analysis of research papers, which I actually use as a research tool of my, in my own work now. So there's smart tech coming to help us towards this idea of, how do you extract the information from something where you only know 40% of the language, and it's useful and you should hang on in there, but there's lots of barriers to fully understanding it. And the other thing is, sometimes you have to read a paper 3, 4, 5 times over maybe a couple of years to really get there.
That's
we're
very
all
encouraging.
learning and
Thank
developing over time. And I've picked up papers, that I put down 5 years ago, because my head was in the right space to take up the ideas. So, that's learning. and we never stop. We never stop.
I think, Penelope, you had a comment, right?
Yeah. No, just a quick comment. So I'm actually working together with Milena. I'm a content creator for EETN. And what I've noticed from the discussions that we're having here, and also what I'm doing I'm basically editing videos along with a colleague of mine. And what I've noticed is that there's a huge juxtaposition between these in-depth studies that we have all over the internet, all over Google Scholar and these platforms, and wanting this quick and easy and catchy information. So us as content, myself, we are cutting away content, cutting away knowledge in that sense, to make it more visual, to make it more attractive, more engaging for audiences, because we don't have time to read long studies. So in that sense, it's like what you said, who am I to cut away someone's interview, or just because there's a time limit, or just to make it more attractive. So in the end, I agree with what Caroline was saying, is that these types of intensive study courses or platforms, or where people who are interested can get a deeper insight, are probably the best way forward.
Interesting. Thank you, Penelope. Thank you.
I have a question as well, actually, to Alison, if I may, quickly, because you're saying, how can we contact people who can learn from us, and which people do you mean exactly? I mean, obviously you mean some businesses, but are you also meaning teachers in classrooms?
Well, yes. I mean, it's interesting. Both Anissa and I have got a little project under wraps, haven't we, Anissa? And it's always so tempting when you've got a new project you want to share. Yeah, we'll share that at the next ISP, Caroline. But we're grappling with this, and we've got something up our sleeves. And yeah, we'll report on it next time, I think. But yeah, exactly that. How do we reach and connect the communities that might want to focus or center around the research ideas that we're looking to share? Answers next time.
But just for me, for one comment, if it is teachers, then just from my own, the teachers that I know, there's a huge fear factor related to technology. So instead of reading an article and learning more about it, they're more likely to run away from it. So I think there's also, if you want more teachers involved, there has to be a kind of project to deal with this.
Yes, yes, I totally, I mean, that's my life's work. We're trying to support teachers to learn technology, to use technology in maths, Caroline. So you've just hit my pain point.